Hello, my name is Flores, and I will be showing you how to do the chicken broth problem step by step. Now, before we begin, we need to identify which variables we are given. From the problem, we can identify that we are given the volume of the chicken broth, which is 500 milliliters. We are also given the specific heat capacity, which is 4.184 joules over grams times Celsius. We are also given the density of the solution, which is 1.0 grams over milliliters. Now we are also given the change in temperature. However, in order to find the change in temperature, we need to subtract the final temperature minus the initial. Now for both the change in temperature of the hot and the cold, the final temperature will be 62 degrees Celsius, as that is what the solution is trying to cool down to. Now the change in temperature for the hot broth will be the final temperature as 62 degrees Celsius and the initial temperature as 99 degrees Celsius. So subtract 62 minus 99 degrees Celsius, and that'll give us negative 37 degrees Celsius. We do the same thing for the cold chicken broth, except that our initial temperature is 12 degrees Celsius. When subtracted, will give us 50 degrees Celsius. Now, we can also find the mass of the hot chicken broth, but in order to do that, we need to use the density that we were given from the problem. Now, the density formula is density equals mass times volume. What we need to do is isolate mass. So subtract volume by both sides, and that'll give you the formula mass equals density times volume. Plugging in the values, density and volume, that'll be 1.0 grams over milliliters times 500 milliliters, which will give us 500 grams for the mass of the hot chicken broth. We, however, cannot do this for the cold chicken broth, as the problem is asking us to find the volume of the cold chicken broth, which means we need to find the mass of the cold chicken broth first. Now that we have all our variables identified, we can now begin to solve for the problem. We need to identify what type of problem this is. This is a calometer problem. Therefore, we can use the formula negative heat loss equals heat gain. And we can also use the formula for heat. Q equals mass times specific heat capacity times change in temperature. Now we can start plugging in Q. Instead of negative heat loss, it'll be negative Q of the hot broth equals Q of the cold broth. Now that we have our formula for the problem, we can now replace Q with its formula. Thus, it will look something like this. Negative parentheses mass of the hot broth times the specific heat capacity of the broth times the change in temperature of the hot broth equals mass of the cold, which is what we're searching for, the specific heat capacity of the broth and the change in temperature of the cold broth. Now, what we need to do is isolate what we're searching for. So we want to isolate mass of the cold so that it's by itself on one side. One way we can do this is subtract both sides by the specific heat capacity of the broth and the change in temperature of the cold. Divide each side, divide it on both sides so that it cancels out on the right, isolating mass of the cold broth. Now that we have our formula, we can begin plugging in our values to start solving for the mass of the cold broth. Plugging in the values and multiplying them gives us on top negative 77,404 joules over on the bottom 209.2 joules over grams. You can get rid of the negative on the top, leaving you with positives on both sides. Now simply divide both the top by the bottom, and that will give you 370 grams. The joules cancel out when you divide them. However, the problem didn't ask for grams. It didn't ask for mass. It asked for the volume of the cold broth. Therefore, we need to convert the mass into volume. How do we do this? The same way we did it for the first mass. We use the density formula again. However, instead of solving for volume, we're going to want to solve for mass. So multiply both sides by volume, then divide both sides by density to isolate volume to one side. That'll give us the formula volume equals mass over density. With that given, we plug in our values. Mass of the cold broth was 370 grams divided by the density, which is 1 gram over milliliters, which gives us 37 milliliters. Therefore, the solution to this problem is 370 milliliters of the cold broth is needed to bring the hot chicken broth to a temperature of 62 degrees Celsius. And that is how you solve the chicken broth problem.